Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week as we always do with an album review. That is where we check out an entire album track by track, seeing what each song does in isolation and how it works within the larger artwork. Today, I am not ready for today. Let me just put it that way. Today we're going to be checking out some fronteiere. I'm not a big fan of that word. We've had them on live stream a couple of times in the past, and a bit of a running joke that I don't know how to pronounce this word. I put too many ers on the end of the word. That sounds starting to sound ridiculous. We have only 50 minutes of music here, which is pretty typical. I say that's about the average for album reactions. Not that I'm specifically aiming for that goal. I mean, we've had 2-hour album reactions too, but it is just the average. I feel like most albums we look at are about 50 minutes long. The catch here, though, is that this isn't 8 to 10 tracks. It's 16. Each of these songs sits somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes long, with the shortest one being 2 minutes exact, and the longest one being a rare jump into the 4-minute range at 4:27. In fact, I think that's the only song in the we do have a 4:13. So 2 out of the 16 actually get into the 4-minute range. A lot of short stuff going on here. Like I said, we've checked out fronteiere before. Fronteiere. I think that's how it's fronteiere. I don't know. I see that E-R-E-R, and I'm just like, that's of course. Fronteiere. We've checked them out before on live stream. They are intense. This is mathcore. It's loud. It's abrasive. It's mathcore. I think that tells you enough. It's core with weird rhythmic stuff. We got 50 minutes of it though. Single songs have overloaded me in the past. I don't know how I'm making it through today, but this intro has been long enough. 2.5 minutes. What am I even doing? Slacking. All right, let's dive into this. See what's going on with their opening track, Heirloom. I can't believe it's only been a minute. It's felt like so much more already. That transition breakdown was gnarly. All right. I'm a little frightened here. I knew this was what I was getting into. Like I said, I've heard them before. I know their style. This is it. But I was kind of hoping that maybe the album might start a little softer. I don't know, even maybe just an intro track of some sort. Give me that stereotypical metal, track one that's like string instruments for no reason. Just like, give me a moment to breathe before you start compressing my lungs. And they don't. This song is abrasive, it's intense, it's antagonistic from beat one, and it never lets up. We do get that strange, like, I don't know, drill and bass beat on the drums and like some electronic stuff, and it's kind of compressed, so it's a little quieter. And that we got that for like 10 seconds, maybe more like 7. I don't know, time felt really stretched in this song. This was not a 3-minute experience for me. This was like 10 minutes. And I don't know how to properly put that into words. I mean, it's just one of those things, it's a time dilation. You just have to feel it to like get it, because it's hard to describe to someone that 3 minutes felt like 10. I mean, I can't believe the song was only 1 minute in when it was. I thought it should have been over. I had already reached my peak of noise. Oh, this is going to be a tough listen, is what I'm getting at. They're starting like this. And what I'm anticipating from that, since I know this is their style, is that this is just what we're going to get. This is one of those albums where they lay down who they are on track 1, and it just gives you a really nice taste of the next 45 minutes of your life. And then you can be like, okay, I'm on board, or you can nope right out of there and say, that's not my jam. Now, unfortunately for me, this ride's already been paid for. I'm in the front seat of it. I'm not getting off till the ride's over. I can't nope out of this, even though they have provided me a clear stop to say, hey, if that wasn't your jam, you're probably not going to like the rest of this. So here we are. I am not thinking I'm going to have a good time on this album, but we will see where it takes us. I am going to reluctantly push forward with it. Geez, the nervous laughter is going to come through so much today, because I just, it's not my cup of tea at all. And let's get into some analysis then. What's going on here? It's noise. Yeah, lots of noise. The cool thing is that there's lots of noise. And because that's kind of a vague statement, let me clarify this. They use a lot of different textures and sounds and timbres and effects and techniques to create all of the different noisy atmosphere. It's not even atmospheres, it's noisy sounds in it. There are all sorts of phaser sounds and warbles and, I don't know, maybe really quick hammer-ons, pull-offs. Maybe they got kill switches going on that they're rapidly tapping. I don't know, but it's like at the end of every 15 seconds or so, they will throw in a new type of noise. I got to look into who plays on this, or I suppose what the instrument list is on this. There's certainly bass, 2 guitars, I'd say, drums, we got vocals. But then all of these textures, these like old school toy laser things from like the 90s, laser guns. You guys remember those? We had them a lot in the States. I don't know how global this was, but especially during the 90s. I'm sure earlier too. It's just like, I grew up in the 90s, so like, I know they were there. But like little plastic toys with some sort of speaker box in it. They're shaped like some sort of sci-fi space pistol. And when you pull the trigger, it's like, and you pull it again, you get a different sound. It's like, wee! And it's like, you get all these really abrasive sci-fi laser sounds. That's what these guys do, except instead of having a speaker box that cycles through 5, I think they had like 30 different ones on this track alone. It's very cool from that perspective of like, how are you guys creating these? Is it digital? Are we working with synthesizers here? Is this all done in post? Do you have a keyboardist who plays these? Are they done with your guitar? And if so, I mean, I've played live rock music before. I know like how foot pedals and your switchboards and all that stuff work. They're not called switchboards, but whatever. Your effects boards. And I know you can switch between a lot of stuff, right? But like, there's got to be 30 presets here plus their usual guitar sounds. And they're swapping between them so fast. I don't know, dude, it is wild. I think it is my favorite part of this song, but it's also because of the novelty of it. And that novelty is going to wear off really quickly. But right here, it's kind of neat to think, you know, every 15 seconds, what kind of sound are they going to make next? And then trying to guess how they might have gone about making that. Now, I don't have a lot of production expertise, especially in the realm of guitar tone production. Especially in the sound of, hey, let's make our guitar sound like a synth pad. Like, that's way outside of my expertise. But it is kind of fun listening and trying to find at least the elements that I am familiar with. The sound effects that I can kind of pinpoint and say, hey, I kind of know how that, you know, what pedal might make that sound, or what type of pedal might make that sound, or help make that sound. And that's really neat. The sounds themselves, definitely I'm not a big fan of, especially in the frequency that we get them. They show up all the time. I would say 70% of this, 60% of this song is texture and the other 40% is riffage. But it is neat to hear how inventive they can get with sonic texture, with their sonic palette in general. You know, we've listened to noisy music in the past. I don't think anything touched on this, which almost feels like it veers into the realm of electronic glitch every now and then. So that's neat. I know they're going to do it a lot. It's going to eventually get on my nerves, but as of right now, I want you all to know I said it was neat. I think it's cool what they're doing in small doses. We'll see where that takes us in the future. Now, like I said, 40% of this is texture work. It's creating these atmospheres, these wild sounds, and making really abrasive, noisy music. The other 40%, though, is riffage. The riffs in here are interesting primarily because of the way that time comes into them. Being that they are mathcore, they tend to have a lot of odd time signature stuff, or more specifically, I think in this case, odd phrasing. Now, I'll be honest, in the what sounded like 4 or 5 different sections of this song, I only picked up the time signature in one of them, and even that one was rather complex and took me 2 times to get through to understand what it was doing. There are 2 ways that I'm going to explain this one section. It's the one that I counted out, or I didn't count it, I conducted it out the first time with my hand and the second time with my head. I don't know if you picked that up, but I was doing the down, left, up because we are in 3. And when you conduct 3, you got down, in, up, down, in, up. But the thing is that every third or every 4th bar was different. So we would do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then this 4th time through was sometimes a 1, 2. It was sometimes just a 1. It was sometimes the full 3. And so another way of conceptualizing this is taking them in groups of 2. We have 3, 3, and then 3 blank. So the 3, 3 is always going to be a 6, 3 plus 3. The other one's going to be a variable. Sometimes it'll be 3 plus 1, which is 4, 3 and 2, which is 5, or 3 and 3, which is 6. So we have alternating 6 and something. A lot of the times I found this was 6, 5, 6, 5, 6, 4, 6, 4, 6, 5, 6, 6. It's kind of difficult to map it out, and honestly, I would need more time with that section to figure out the exact pattern of how they move through it, but there was always a 6 that came between the variable one. So that's neat. I'm always a big fan of odd time signature stuff and weird phrasing, and even when it goes over my head and it's all too dense, I enjoy the fact that it is rhythmically not simple to digest. It almost acts like a puzzle. My brain loves to solve them. And when I hear stuff like this, I just think I gotta figure this out. Let's start counting it. Inside of these moments, though, we have riffage. We have notes, although they're primarily chords. And as far as I can tell, they're mostly power chords, just due to how stable they sound. They don't necessarily have to be power chords. Power chords are fairly stable. You have your root, your fifth, and your octave. The root and the octave are the same note in the key of C major. The root and the octave are both the note of C. The fifth is G in that chord, or in that key. And so we have C, G, C. And the root and the fifth is the most stable interval aside from the root and the octave because they are the same notes. That's perfect stability. And so being that these are the most stable intervals in any key, it's just a very stable chord, and that stability comes through in the sound. Usually when I hear something like this, it's power chords. Especially in metal, because metal loves power chords anyways, and the stability helps with the extra compression and distortion and all of that stuff going on, because that stuff will amplify instability. It will amplify the dissonance of music. So, lots of power chords, lots of heaviness. This is down-tuned, obviously. There's a lot of weight, and it's not like the riffs are super memorable. A lot of it is just quicker chord movement, moving between 3 or 4 chords and starting it over again. It's not noisy, and well, I mean, it's still heavy, but it doesn't focus on the atmosphere or the texture of the guitar tone as much as the moving idea within it. And then these are contrasted with the noise, where you just hold out some of these wild, gnarly sounds that we talked about in the previous section. The drums in here are well done. They are all over the place. Lots of snare love going on here. Exceptionally complex. I don't know that I heard any polyrhythm on this track, but I was fairly overwhelmed with the sonic textures, and I'll be honest, I didn't get a lot of time to live with what the drummer was doing and really absorb what they were playing. So that's going to be something I'm going to attempt to do, and keyword on attempt there, in these next couple of tracks coming up. It's really sit in that drum world and see what they're doing. I know that I heard a lot of snare though, and the snare accents were wild, really tough to follow in some places, creating, well, I guess they were polyrhythmic because they didn't really follow any sort of backbeat that the guitars, bass, vocals even were following, if we look at their accented notes. So I guess technically the snare would probably fall under a polyrhythmic element, but I don't know what the core beat is in most of these to really say, yeah, this was certainly a polyrhythm against this core, 5/8 beat or something. So I don't know. I have a lot of work ahead of me trying to figure out what's going on rhythmically in these songs. And it's going to be something I'm going to focus a little bit more on, especially if they choose to stick with this more texture-based writing style, which I kind of have less to say about because it's really just there to create the atmosphere, which, I mean, moving on to that direction, Heirloom's atmosphere is fairly apparent to me. It's gnarly, it's disgusting, it's a filthy atmosphere full of abrasive sounds with lots of warble and distortion, and they're really amplifying those in order to create something that is consistently gnarly. I feel very uncomfortable listening to this music. It's not a headspace, an emotion, an atmosphere I like to dwell in. And unfortunately, well, fortunately for them, I think they're going to be rather consistent, but unfortunately for the analysis, I don't really think that's going to change much. And I kind of worry that 16 songs is going to be taking 10 minutes between each track, basically repeating myself. Yes, this song was also difficult to follow rhythmically, and it was also very gnarly in its textures. They used a lot of wild guitar tones, and it was interesting from that angle. Like, I don't know that there's a lot to dive into here as far as, emotional theming. It really is the rhythmic side where I think I'm going to find variety in analysis and discussion with each track. So I'm hoping I can pick up on some of that going forward. I didn't say anything much about the vocalist. Kind of, as far as I remember, one note in its harshness, but very abrasive, very large sound, the perfect style of vocals for this music. Let me hit some lyrics on Heirloom, and I'll push forward into Corrosive Wash. That does not sound fun. Lyrics as I do with the music. The first stanza, I think, is interesting. It says, I belong blinded in a mask that will shut me up, but don't refute my generous self-order to gag, as my personal struggle belongs with my intent to speak on my behalf, with a bladed tongue cutting you in half. He says that basically, I talk way too much, but I'm not doing this for your benefit. I actually struggle with speaking what I think I need to say to stand up for myself. And he goes on to say, I saved you, I spared you, I maimed you, I changed you. The title of the song comes in the third stanza. There's an heirloom hanging around, like an old soul that's watching me. I knew you weren't going nowhere fast. You're too different, they said, in fact. Heirloom. And I don't get this at all, other than that this thing, this heirloom, this object that has been passed down from generations, feels like it bears a weight, a presence on the narrator. It feels like it surveils them. But what that has to do with the other person, I don't know. We have a section that says, breathe, life has challenged me. Breathe, like a precious artifact hanging from a burning tree. Here, I stand as an heirloom. From a burning tree I hang, battered, beloved, burning heirloom. Watch me age, engage, consume. Yeah, dude, I'm so lost. The imagery in here is phenomenal. It paints such strong pictures with just words. But what any of it means, I have no idea. So let's keep pushing forward, I suppose. Going into our second track, Corrosive Wash. Let's dive in.
You gotta
turn that down on my end at least. Yeah, dude, the the drummer starting out on, I don't even remember if it was 1 and 3 or 2 and 4, but we created a groove. We shifted to the opposite of that groove. If it was 1 and 3, we shifted to 2 and 4 accents, but then we also double timed it. And for whatever reason, I don't know if my mind just cracked at that point from all of the insanity of this song, but it just, that made me laugh for some reason. Such a simple little idea. They didn't just choose to shift accent points. They didn't just choose to double time it. They did both. And it felt just as awkward as it should have, while also making complete sense within the chaos that fronteiere makes. It's, I don't know. I think that perfectly encapsulates this stuff. What we've heard, this 1/7 of an album so far. None of this should make sense. None of this should work. And yet it all does. It forms into their sound, their chaotic sounds. I don't know. This song pretty much fits the description of the last song. I don't have much new to add to this. I tried to keep up with some of the rhythmic stuff. I counted out a 4/4 in there. And then that 4/4 section also had an interesting extension at the end of the phrase that I think pushed the final bar of it. Like it was a group of 8 bars and the 8th bar was 6 beats instead of 4. And I thought I could anticipate that the second time around, but joke's on me. They didn't do it a second time around. They went into a brand new section that I have no idea what the time signature was in there because the accent point shifted, the accent rhythm shifted, and there was no backbeat to fall onto. So I don't know. It's noisy, it's chaotic, lots of wild textures. 2 things I want to touch on though before we head into lyrics, which fingers crossed, I get this next set of lyrics. If I can't explain the music and I can't explain the lyrics on any of these tracks, I don't know what I'm doing here. Geez. The first thing was the constant rising section that was, I guess, right in the middle of the track, about, a minute 30, minute 45 in. This was wild. So many different guitar textures, or I meant to look that up, or keyboard texture. Still not sure what's going on there. Layering on top, not in equal measure either. We're always adding another layer to both the left and right side, but the layers themselves aren't the same. One might be very glitchy and one might be very noisy, or feedback or something like that. And so we're getting all of these layers of sounds, just a plethora, cacophony of noise going on. The vocalist, I'm pretty sure, is screaming through this entire thing. The perceived pitch out of whatever thing is on the outside giving us any sort of pitch along this is constantly rising up to higher and higher notes, and it just doesn't stop. It gets denser, it gets heavier, it gets louder, it gets higher pitched. It just keeps going. And like I said, I'm pretty sure the vocalist screamed through this whole thing. It just never seemed like it was stopping. And then we get a very clear new vocal stem coming in the center to transition us into the next section. That whole thing was phenomenal. Very cool idea. And I mean, it's not necessarily the idea that I think is excellent, it's the execution on it. There has been plenty of bands, and not even just rock bands. I mean, this is like a classical thing too of using sustained volume as a way of creating tension to transition into a new idea. Like this is an old concept in music, but the way they pull it off is rather fresh. And they do it with such ease. I don't know, like this music is so outside of my bounds, both what I listen to and what I create, that it feels like something that would have to be forced. Because from my perspective, this would never come naturally to me. And it kind of blows my mind that, what, like 3 to 5 people? I'll look who's in the band when we take a break for lyrics right here. Because I want to see if that's digital or the guitar is doing all those weird sounds. But 3 to 5 people, maybe more, maybe less. Maybe it's a one-man project. They've come together and they've done this. They're all on that same wavelength. I've never met anybody who would make music like this, and yet they have found a group of people who come together to do that. That's bonkers, man. That's wild. I'm glad they did, because honestly, we've heard glitch rock, glitch metal. We've heard plenty of mathcore on here. And I mean, this takes the cake. I've never heard anything like this. This is all of the intensity and chaos of Dillinger Escape Plan with, you know, the absurdity in sound production of glitch music and like Vocaloid electronic, which tends to go into these really wild textures and sounds too. So it's more of that abrasive experimental side of electronic mixed with the experimental side of mathcore, and the abrasiveness of all of that come together, and it's this is pretty one of a kind, man. The other thing I wanted to bring up is just the feedback, dude. A whole section of just high-pitched feedback. I don't know if y'all had to turn your sound down. I turned mine down. I never touch y'all's audio. I figure you can change that as you need. I don't want to manipulate that in case it works for you. But on my side, I turned my own audio down. I dropped it about 25% because that was, I mean, it's starting to hurt. You know, I've mentioned this before too, really high-pitched tones, feedback, heavy dissonance, or I guess prolonged elements of heavy dissonance. They are physically painful to me. Not that I get an earache, it just causes extreme discomfort and pain in the body. And that was one of them. That's one of those tones that just, it doesn't work for me at all. And it goes into a very negative realm of destructive music writing that feels exceptionally antagonistic to me, at least, as it causes me physical pain. So I hope they don't do more of that. But it does line up with their brand of disgusting, abrasive, antagonistic music. And I use words like disgusting, and I think I've said filthy earlier in here. I use them very, very endearingly. Like I'm trying to use them positively for the music. I think that they are positive descriptors of the sound that they're making, not saying that they make bad music and calling it dirty or you know, disgusting, non-pretty, stuff like that. But I just think it's an accurate way of describing the type of sound they're crafting. So that's about all I have to say on this one. Let's hit some lyrics. All right. I don't have any information about any sort of digital sounds. However, one of the guitarists also is the lead writer, the mixer, the engineer, and handles production in general. Could be that there's an additional, like, additional sounds added in post, but given that there's no explicit, I mean, it's not like, I mean, that just falls under the producer's job to add in the extra stuff that isn't played. Especially when you look at like pop music, the producer is who creates the beat. Even if there is acoustic instrumentation recorded for it, the producer is still going to be the one who adds all the digital elements. So there is a chance, possibly, because we don't have a good word for the person who writes the digital parts of a song. There is a possibility that some of these are digital, but we don't have a keyboardist in the group to play these live. So they're either done with a backing track or it is all guitar. And I've looked high and low for information about this and I can't find any. So if you are aware of it, please let me know. Are some of these sounds purely digital, or is everything that I'm hearing being created with the guitar? I was right about the instrumentation though. Aside from that guitarist who handles everything else to do with the songwriting and creation process, we do have a second guitarist, a bassist, a drummer, and a vocalist. So I had those 5 right. So yeah, that's about it there. Kind of a dead end for information, but I got a little bit out of it, I suppose. The lyrics for this. I mean, there's an element of a deep clean going on here, using acid to wash someone, as the title Corrosive Wash kind of leans into. The opening stanza says, "Cancel the gathering, I'm burning, take me to the water, take me to the cleansing. I'm bruised at the water's edge. You've got to remove skin if you want to leave. Blind from its acrid waves, I'm no more alive in this human state. But don't give up tonight, don't give up and die." The main concept here is that the cleaning process, the washing process, is dangerous, but necessary. Whatever he was prior to this, when he was on fire, it was not a way to live. He needed to clean himself, using the metaphor of water here, but then talking about acidic waves and removing that top layer of skin if he wants to survive. It says, "Darkness is the light, but there is none tonight. Wash until it's gone, taste the norm, wash the blood black with rust. I'm inside the trouble now." It's the thing is, with both of these lyrics that we've dove into so far, is that they're incredibly vague, but figurative too. There's a lot of figurative language going on, and it disguises things below the surface, because what's on the surface, you get hints of things, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. There are a ton of incomplete sentences in both of these songs that we've listened to so far. And so you really have to get to that second layer to derive any sort of meaning out of it. And I've got a little bit of it on this one, but there's like 12, 13 stanzas here. And I don't know, I picked up maybe 4 of them and have found a little bit of a thread that can pull them together. But honestly, a lot of this song goes over my head, just like the first track's lyrics did. So it does feel very intense though. It does feel very, what's the word I want? Of the now. Important? Something that needs to be done immediately. And that sort of immediate intensity, that's a good way of describing the music. I don't know what was going on with that first track, but this one certainly captures the vibe of the music. I think that the lyrics and the music work really well together at creating an atmosphere that meets both themes. We're going to continue on, probably combining a couple of tracks here unless something really interesting happens. Because I do get the feeling a lot of this is going to be very similar. Let's dive into Opaque Horizon.
Down,
The very compressed chiptune percussive work in the background was a nice touch. Interesting bit of harmony going on here. Are those clean vocals in the background too? Implying the cyclicality of it, which we did hear that section a lot. Also, I think that is the first really clean break in the album so far. Most of the tracks have run right up into the next song, but this one had a second and a half of silence at the end of it. Maybe not actual silence, but at least to my ears, I didn't hear anything. I wasn't looking at the audio stuff over there. It's quite possible there was a sound, since it would be a bit odd in the mastering process to have all of your songs run right up to the end of the time, except for this one, to put that second or two of silence at the end of it, which is a bit more of the norm, to have a couple of seconds of silence at the end of a song. So I do kind of like that. I do like this song as a whole, though. It started out, and I actually took a note. My note simply states, very samey. Now, granted, I was going to hang on to this note for a while, but it works well to get into my mindset while listening to this song here. I was going to come back to it later on in the album, maybe around the halfway point, and see if it was still something I felt was appropriate. But tracks 1 and 2 and the first half of track 3 all are very similar. Usually a heavy beat, rhythmically focused, texturally focused, not a lot of harmony, not a lot of melody, and then some scratchy, weird, electronic, glitchy noises to contrast that. And that's it. You jump back and forth between the two. Maybe there's a breakdown somewhere that brings the rhythmic intensity down, but it still really focuses on rhythm and texture, going for heavy antagonistic sounds. We did have a little bit of some atmospheric stuff on track 2, but it was such a small element of it. I mean, unless you want to count the feedback section, which I guess is atmospheric, but that's like negative atmosphere for me. I've already talked about that, though. This song surprises me, though, and I think this is a good time to get into it. You know, we've had 2 songs that are very similar. Let's change things up a little bit. And that's what this song does. It introduces harmony and maybe even a little bit of melody. I kind of find it difficult to say that there is solid, definitive melody in here, but there are more melodic ideas. Pitches seem to be more intentionally placed in this track. And a lot of it just comes down to, hey, the chord progression. Well, there is a chord progression. But the chord progression has pitched movement to it. That kind of brings a melodic quality. And when I've just had almost 10 straight minutes of no melody, even the slightest hint of melodic writing feels exceptionally powerful. So I don't know if, again, I wouldn't call this melody, but it brings melodic qualities in, it brings harmonic qualities in. The entire back half of this track has some sort of powerful chords going on in the background. They're very resonant, produced very well. There's a lot of effects and stuff going on to make them sound larger, and almost gives them the feeling of being in a room with very solid acoustics. There's a nice echo going on to them, not one that feels unnatural, but feels like being in a large room. And it works well. The textures of the instruments kind of get taken down a notch. The glitch elements are removed mostly. And we just have a focus on this rhythmic groove, almost going into a genty angle on top of this chordal movement. And then we have the vocals on top of that. And for the first moment in this album, I'm like, this isn't that bad. Would I, put this on of my own accord? No, probably not, even if the album was mostly like this, but it's a silver lining. I enjoyed the section. And all it needed was a little bit of harmony. And that's when it dawned on me that, I haven't brought this up yet until right now, but there's just no melody on this album. And that's going to be a really tough pill to swallow for me. I was going to say I'm a sucker for melody, which I am. You give me a solid melody and it can really override a lot of negative elements in the music. If I can hate a lot of it, but if the melody's solid, I can probably get through it pretty well. It might even grow on me because the melody is going to keep me involved. Some people love good riffage. Some people love noise and sound, and that's their hook into music. The other parts can be variable, but not that. For me, that's melody. What the genre is doesn't really matter, but if your melody hooks me, I'll be there. And when a band doesn't use melody much, I find it really difficult to get into, and that's where I am with this. I think if we had all of this heavy weight on the guitars and the drums and the bass, but there were clean vocals on top, might actually even be something I enjoy. This is a bit on the mathier side. There's a lot of fun irregularities and more progressive writing, but it's really close to some of the heavier, more abrasive side of post-hardcore. And honestly, the music is more abrasive than I usually listen to, but I have heard and enjoy post-hardcore albums that are kind of going in this direction, not quite to this extremity, but they have clean vocals. That's the thing that hooks me on them. And this pushes that into an extreme while also removing the one thing that anchors me in stuff like this. And so I don't know that I've ever vocalized that. I know I've enjoyed melody. I know I've told people in the past I enjoy melody, but I never really realized how much it's a necessity for me in music. And so that's kind of nice. Fronteiere, even if I end up not enjoying the album here, I've learned something about myself through it. And that's what good art does. All right, so this is my favorite song so far. It's only winning by a margin, but they had something harmonic in it, and that won me over. Let's look at some lyrics. The beginning song talks about rebirth. It says, as I reset, I am now stagnant. As I admit, I am now new. Again, offline, inside. As I reset, so I am new again. From here, though, we have a couple of stanzas of slight variability. You go down swayed, you go down reconnect. You go down swift, you go down recommit. You go down late, you go down reattempt. The idea that however many times you get knocked on the ground, you get back up, you reconnect, you recommit, you reattempt. Doesn't matter how you go down. You do it again, you get back up. It says, as you hold the light, as darkness shields us from discerning right, let us start again. So this concept of restarting, getting back up and doing it again, better this time, is pretty apparent in the beginning of this track, but the back half, the atmospheric aspect, if I'm remembering some of the rhythmic flow of these lines, because the stanzas drastically changed, the flow, the pacing, the length, all of it it's different here. This part makes no sense to me though. There's a lot of repetition in here. It says, born as you've always planned it, now mourn for the end is sudden. In death there is darkness lurking, and then in light there's a horizon looming. No rest is what is only starting over. No rest for such as the one that's going under. No love for young as the elder is older. No love for some that begin out of order. And I think that's it. Those two stanzas are repeated in pattern that I don't see. It seems random which one they're going to sing next. But I don't know what any of that means, particularly within the context of getting up and striving to fight for what's right despite having been knocked down for the 100th time. So again, I'm kind of lost on this. I see a pattern here. We're a fifth of the way done with this, and I don't know that I've had a lot to say. I think the title of this video is going to exclude the word analysis. This is just a reaction video at this point. I hope it's still entertaining, though. I hope I'm not wasting y'all's time. This is going to be a long video, too, I think. Jeez, and I'm already fatigued. We have a lot of music left ahead of us. We have a lot of time left ahead of us. This next track is called Death / backslash. I can never tell the difference. Anyways, a long time from now, the final track of the album is called /Hope. I wonder if these are supposed to be understood together. Death / hope. I really hope that I can remember the song Death enough in the next hour and a half or two when we finally get around to the track Hope to see if there's any sort of connectivity musically between these two. But for now, let's just dive in and see what they're doing with Death. Turning musical birdsong into metal. little bit of a build up here. That was on me for expecting to go back to a lighter, more atmospheric thing like the end of track 3. Yeah, dude, that's some harsh dissonance on the outskirts right there. Yeah, most of the time when I've described this music as antagonistic or, heavy, weighty, destructive, it's more about the tone of everything. There's a heavy weightiness that feels like being punched over and over and over by sounds. I think there at the end, though, was the first time that the antagonistic elements of the music are harmonic property rather than a production property. I don't think we've heard extended dissonance like that at all on this track. And there we had 30 straight seconds of it. Very uncomfortable sound. Not a big fan of that at all. But, you know, an interesting part of the equation that was missing. Sounds like this usually incorporates dissonance in it. And it's kind of been lacking, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. Like I said, a lot of bands who produce this music go in that direction. And I think that they have been, you know, playing music that definitely fits in with bands like, you know, Dillinger Escape Plan, other really heavy, abrasive mathcore stuff. Car Bomb, I think, is another good band. I think that they are definitely up there in terms of skill and sound, but they've done it with a more consonant harmony up until this point. For the most part, some of those odd, you know, really quick phasery sounds, they incorporate a bit of dissonance into them, but they're usually fleeting. It's something that appears at the end of a phrase. The atmospheres, the riffs themselves have usually been consonant on this. And so I find it really interesting here that we get an atmosphere of just dissonance, of tones, of pitches that don't play nice with each other. Now, on this idea of being punched in the face by sounds, while listening to that track, I came up with the dumbest metaphor. A simile popped into my mind that this song has all of the tact of a boxer playing patty cake. It makes no sense. Could you just imagine someone's like, hey, let's play patty cake, and the boxer's like, obviously the intensity of these two, well, I mean, it depends on who you're playing patty cake with. I've been in some intense patty cake like things with kids. They get really intense about it. But anyways, you know, obviously there's like the difference there. And that's, I mean, I think that's what this feels like. I'm very much the kid wanting to play patty cake, and the music just wants to box me. We both have hands up, but we have totally different intentions of why. And that's when I landed on the phrase sonic violence. It's why being punched in the face by sound was a phrase that I used just a little bit ago, because this concept of sonic violence has been on my mind since about the middle of track 5 there. This song, all these songs, this band fills space as much as it can, makes each individual note feel as large and as impactful as it can, and puts all of these massive, impactful sounds into very tight spaces where you end up hearing a lot of them rapidly. That is what this band does really well. And if you enjoy that, it probably feels less violent. To me, sonic violence is the perfect phrase for what I have just listened to the past 15 minutes, give or take, of this album. It's not been enjoyable. And that's about where I'm at with it. Sonic violence is probably going up in the title of this video, alongside my idea of removing the word analysis. The other thing that I started paying attention to in these two tracks is the drum work. I said I was going to be looking at it. I checked out a little bit of it on track 2. Track 3's drum work was totally different, so I didn't really have a lot to build on top of, but 4 and 5 certainly solidified this. There are 2 types of drum patterns on this. One is just hit the snare often and frequently and hard. Basically, whenever the guitars strum, you're gonna hit the snare on that, and it creates these very rapid fire, abrasive hits. It's what gives a lot of those notes that impact. It's the crack of the snare alongside the massive size of the guitars and bass. Sometimes even the vocals are in on this, and you have the largeness and grittiness and compression of that too. It really is the band locking in as a single machine on these really rapid staccato rhythms. But the drums have another form, and we actually heard it at the, I think it was the first section of Death. The bass kick will follow along with the guitars. And you'll get this cool syncopated da 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 on the bass kick, right? And you get this nice thumping beneath the guitar rhythm that's going along with that. The snare is going to be key accent points. Now, sometimes that will be a bit more straightforward. We might land with like a 2 and a 4. And so you have these really jagged, djenty rhythms everywhere else, and then the solid backbeat on the snare. But the snare also can create syncopated accent points too, where maybe you get a hit on 2 and then the end of 4, then the end of 3 and 4, maybe the end of 3 and the end of 4, and then the 2, kind of dancing around that 4, creating these offbeat strikes. And there were times, mostly during drum fills, or I guess what would be their equivalent of a drum fill, where the drummer kind of went in the middle of these worlds, where the bass kick is what was lining up with the guitar rhythm, but the snare was firing off quite a bit more often than just providing a backbeat, sort of shifting into that world of lining up with the guitars while also omitting some of the hits to create something a bit more syncopated and restricted against that core, more aggressive rhythmic device going on. I guess this is all to say that the drums operate on a spectrum, on a sliding scale, and they basically have 2 modes, and they operate a lot of space between them, and they can gradually shift into and remove beats to get out of that more aggressive sound. I haven't heard another style of the drummer yet, although I've only really been paying attention to them for 2 songs, other than the more straightforward drumming that we heard on track 3, the back half of it, as we approached that more, I'm going to use the word calmer, but by no means is the back half of track 3 a calm section, but comparatively it is a calmer idea, and the drums lightened up quite a bit to accentuate that feeling. But I'm curious if there's going to be any other aggressive style of drum work that might go against this idea of the spectrum. How often do we play the snare against the guitar riff? Very few times, or on every single hit, lining up completely with it, and sort of, fluctuating between those 2 modes. Yeah, that's about wraps it up for that one. Well, I'm going to wait until we get through track 8 before I bring this other topic up, but it comes back to my idea of musical similarity. I think I finally get a song's lyrics. The opening of this track is a jumping back and forth between the words death and hope. I do think then that this will connect to the track Hope later on that wraps up this album. Here, though, I think it is how widespread death can transform into global hope. That the loss of lives on a global scale can get the entire world to push towards a better future. It talks about how there is a race to become evil, and they will forever burn the antidote. That they will attempt to ensure there is no remedy to their evilness. It says that death is the end stage, but that there is hope for death, presumably those that are the evil ones, and there is a death of hope. But regardless what they say, regardless what they do, you will carry on. So it doesn't matter what's going on with these people. It doesn't matter what kind of destruction they're putting on humanity. Things will be better. You just have to believe in it. You have to hope for it and push forward for those things to happen. It says they will always keep coming. But we can carry on. I like that message. The end says they were once the ruler of days, they are now the killers of night, and they are now who we despise. Yeah, that one is still a lot of half sentences almost, just barely having the necessity to form a sentence, a verb and a noun. There's a lot of 4-word lines. But this one comes off a little easier for me. For whatever reason, I picked up a reading. I don't know if it's the reading. I don't know if it's the intention of the lyricist. But I got something out of it, which is better than the last 3 tracks. And, you know, I've got to be showing my place. I have no idea what's going on with track 5, Disintegrative, just to make sure that, you know, my ego didn't grow a little bit because I picked up the themes of one song. Here we go again. I don't know what's happening with this one, but I am seeing a recurrence of vocabulary themes. This song brings in ideas of blinding. It brings back ideas of burning or fire. We return to ideas of shadows. And then there's this idea of disintegrating the outside to see what is on the inside, which harkens back to Corrosive Wash, about destroying the skin in order to be reborn. And so we see a bit of all of this. For instance, the chorus says disintegrative. No longer pry from the inside, you are disintegrated, these bones shine with light, casting the future to all. So we have lost what is on the outside, but that has made us better for the future. Again, I don't really understand it. I see some commonality here. I'm trying to piece together themes from across the album because I'm really not picking up themes within each song. We are continuing on with some of the ideas shown in Death about those who rule the world and the impact it has on those below them. There's a repeated phrase in here, gluttony isn't free, the weight of the world will eat the disease. The idea that those who are going to overconsume, who will sit at the top, will eventually be eaten to continue on with the gluttonous angle. And they will eat the disease, the person themselves being the disease, not the gluttony as a character flaw. But there is a repeated section in the middle of the track that states, together from inside this shell I knock. Forever I knock for this hell to stop. I don't know what the shell is. I don't know what the purpose of the knocking is. But there is definitely a hope for change, which follows along with what we saw in Corrosive Wash and Death. I am finding it impressive just how many words are in each of these tracks. Even with track 4 only being 2.5 minutes long, there were still 9-10 stanzas in it. They cram these songs full, not just sonically of these massive sounds compounding off of each other and creating something that fills so much space, but lyrically, these are incredibly dense tracks as well. I find that to be an impressive part of the song that also lines up thematically with what the music is doing. I'm going to push forth into one of the longer tracks. This is one of our 4-minute songs called This Magnetic Drift. There's that heavy dissonance back from the end of Disintegrative. So that 16th note riff that we just heard on the guitar is a little bit different from most of their other writing. This song is just one note, the song. I don't think the guitars have played another pitch. Well, the scratchy stuff, yeah. Song was focused on one. Granted, it's a couple of notes as we bend into that lower one. We'll probably slide into it. But just one note. I'll give him credit there. Not half time, but definitely a massive tempo reduction. All right. I was tempted to go into track 8, and I think if we didn't have that ambient section in track 7, I probably would have. But I want to talk about this while it's prescient, and I don't know if track 8 is going to do it. Track 6 and 7 are one-note songs. There are some deviations from that, but so much of the last 7 minutes of music, exactly 7 minutes of music, actually 700, is just pick a note and play a rhythm on it. Now, granted, track 7 had the pitch shift. Bow, bow. We kind of had that slide into that lower tone, that half step drop, but I mean, it's that same pitch shift that happens there. I mean, track 6 is just hit the note over and over for 4 minutes straight. Hit the note. Play that note. It's honestly, I try not to be too inflammatory, but I am going to throw a little subjective stuff in here. I find it to be very boring. I found both of these songs to not be engaging for me. The entire band is in on the rhythm. The instruments that have pitch only play one pitch, so we get nothing from that. It's just the same texture and sound for an extended amount of time. The vocals are in on this rhythm. The drums are in on this rhythm. There's no plurality to any of the composition stuff. Now, technically, this is fine. In fact, it works as a bit of contrast to what we've heard in other tracks, which have more rhythmic variety to them, which have more sonic variety to them. These two tracks barely even had any of the glitchy, scratchy sounds going on the outskirts either, although track 6 did start with some dissonant atmospheric stuff. But for the most part, the past 7 minutes has removed all of the things that I find interesting about the band. And I want to use the word interesting there. I don't necessarily like what they're doing, but it does separate them from their peers. It creates something that is definitively fronteiere. And it removes all of those elements that make them them and then just give us boring breakdown music. Anybody could be making these. The rhythms aren't really that technical. There's none of their special sauce, which is the interesting guitar tones going on here. There isn't any of the mathy rhythms going on. This is just very straightforward breakdown music without the fact that the breakdown works by being contrasted by more technical or spacious stuff. The breakdown is usually in antithesis. It is a simplification of creating stupid, simple, heavy moments of the song to contrast with others. And we don't get anything else to contrast it to. Now, like I mentioned, within the album, I think that's fine. We have heard some much wilder music coming into this. But it doesn't make these two songs stand out much to me. And they almost feel like filler that needed another draft to bring them up to frontierer style. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, and maybe you love this dip, this lull in the album. Maybe it works because we're about ready to head into some higher points. But for me personally, like I said, I'm not a real big fan of the album to begin with, and they removed the things that I even had a bit of appreciation for and left me with just the stuff I'm not a big fan of. So, yeah, I don't know, man. There's a cool bit of ambience in track 7. I was hoping that would run us to the end. We only got it for like 20 seconds though, and we were right back to the heavy stuff, which just makes me wonder why introduce it at all. why not stick around with it for a little bit? I mean, it's not like you're hurting for heaviness on this album. It's not like you need to hit a higher quota. The whole album's heavy. You could have stuck with that for a little longer, but they just chose not to. Maybe there's a lyrical reason that I probably won't be able to figure out. But I did find that to be a little disappointing. Now, the last point I want to make before we head into the next track, earlier on in the album, I had mentioned that it felt very samey. You got your heavy beats, your scratchy sounds, sometimes a breakdown, occasionally a more atmospheric chordal-based section, and that's it. Now, I will say that these songs have variability to them on the technical level, and maybe if you're more, if you have more experience with this style of music, maybe you can hear more dynamic qualities than I can. My dynamic scale tends to be pretty big though. You know, I don't just listen to metal. I listen to jazz. I listen to pop music. I listen to Spanish music. It's like all over the place. I have a very wide spectrum of music that I enjoy. And so stuff like this, as minute as some of the dynamic elements in the writing might be, it's all just registers as like 10 out of 10 extreme to me. And that makes it all feel very samey. It isn't just that some of these songs have similar backbones to them, similar blueprints to their composition. It's literally that we are approaching the halfway point of the song, and if you asked me to hum anything that was unique to any of these tracks, I couldn't. If you played me a passage, I would not be able to tell you what song it came from. Usually, I will have some notes to say this was the song that did this, this was the song that did this, to help me differentiate between them. And sometimes I don't even have to make those notes on paper. It's just a mental part. When I think back on the album, this song was this song was this. But for me, this entire album is the same sound. I have an immensely difficult, maybe even an impossible time differentiating any of these tracks except for track 3, which is the one I always talk about when I bring up contrast on the album, because it's the only one that has done anything wildly different so far. And it gave us atmosphere, it gave us harmony, gave us something quasi-melodic. Everything else just sounds like the same thing to me, which is a double-edged sword. If you're loving this, more of it's going to be better. But if you're someone who likes contrast, if you don't like this, if you're in my position and one song was enough, it's just too much. It's very grating. And so, you know, that's not something particular to Fronteiere. That's a decision that I think every band, every album goes through. Do you create a lot of stuff that's the same and really lean into a sound, or do you go for a variety of sounds, trying to find a home sound that's yours and then adapt that to a bunch of different styles or something to create each song in a more unique fashion? Neither one is more correct than the other. Art comes at us in lots of different ways. Especially on the extreme side, though, you tend to find more similarity between songs, and I think that's what we're finding here. I'm not a big fan of it, but if you like this type of music, 40 minutes of this sound may be right up your alley. But like I said, I think they did a fantastic job of introducing the sound on track 1 and creating that you know, getting off point. Like, hey, you've ridden the ride this far, the rest of it's going to be similar. Here's your last chance to get off the ride. You know, if you want to duck out, that's perfectly cool. We get it. It's not for you. And it's been pretty clear that that's what they're doing. They have one sound, they stick with it. And I'm not going to lie, I would have gotten off the ride earlier if I was listening to this on my own. But certainly by this point, I do not have any notion that things are going to change in the next 8 to 9 tracks. Let me hit some lyrics on these two and then we'll push forward. All right, this song's interesting, The Magnetic Drift. It's another one, I don't know what's going on. There's some interesting visuals to it. As usual, the language is very evocative, but I don't know necessarily what it's trying to say. But here's something that I am noticing. As we get further into the album, we are seeing less linear poetry in the lyrics and more cyclical poetry in the lyrics. This one is, I mean, depending on how you want to break up stanzas, I'm looking at every time that there is a line break between lyrics. We're looking at like 20 stanzas on this. Granted, it is one of their longer tracks. It is their longest track, 4.5 minutes. They put a lot of words in it, and that's remembering that they had a 30-second vocalist intro with that noisy atmosphere stuff. But the thing is, despite having all these stanzas, as far as unique stanzas go, I think there's 4, maybe 5. Everything is repeated. And honestly, in most of these stanzas, even on the original run, there's a lot of repetition within them. For instance, one of the unique stanzas is, "With you gone, now who's God?" Repeated 8 times. So as far as unique lines, there's probably not that many in here. So despite having a lot of words and having a lot of length, there's not a lot of depth to it. At least not depth measured by unique lines. There might be a lot of depth in the meaning to it. But again, that sort of eludes me. So I have to go on something a bit more calculable, which is not a great way to define art, but it's all I have right now. The opening line states, "Trashing the meadow with tar from the halo, working against what robs us of our metal. Never intending to see what's unhinging me. Words can't tell the end result with the decline away from the start." I mean, we have the idea of destroying what we need, working against what we should be working for, basically shooting ourselves in the foot and making it look like the best thing that we could do. It says, "This magnetic drift takes me where I belong, below the dark abyss to the depths where I exist." We go back to trashing the meadow. We do that 10 times through, never intending to see what's unhinging me. And then we bring up the newest idea that will be repeated a plethora of times on the rest of this track. "Bury me drifting free. Bury me up to my throat now. Draining me every day. Bury me. Hurry, please. Bury me up to my throat." This idea of being buried and drifting and, I don't know, buried up to the throat to leave the head available. We repeat this several times. And then, "With you gone, who's God?" I don't know, man. There's a return to the ideas of darkness. There is a tinging or a destruction of that which is good. There's a feeling that this person belongs in the darkness, which is something that's been alluded to on a couple other tracks, but not necessarily been a strong part. It lines up with wanting to be buried, and that takes up half of the lyrics at least. So it's a prominent part of this one, but I don't know what it's all supposed to mean. So LKWX. I don't know, man. Lucky Winks. I don't know, every time I see WX, I think of Winx Club. Never seen an episode, but dude, I saw so many commercials for that as a kid. I don't know, it always kind of seemed cool. Anyways, I don't know what LKWX is, but my guess is probably something to do with lakes and wax, since those are the two elements being spoken about here. We have a lake that holds our heads under a moat of regrets, and we all give in during this. So succumbing to the weight and darkness of our shame of the things we've done in the past. That is a pretty powerful statement. But then we also have waking up under wax and slowly seizing up. We melt, our lungs engulf, and as I melt, I'm welcomed back. So rebirth. Through melting wax, we have this idea of fire presenting a new form. Once again, just like, well, similar to corrosive wash and disintegrative. We have mud and grimy folds washing over like a fiery undertow. So once again, fire being presented. We have mud and grime as sort of dirty words that, dirty words. Words that present a filth or dirtiness that are fairly present on the album. We do have this stanza that I like. This place is long gone and I'm numb, forgiven now, no longer loved. So if we have this feeling of shame of our past, we have now been forgiven by it, but unloved in the present. The truth has come through, and while people have learned to move on from the pain that this person's caused, it hasn't allowed them to reconnect, to rekindle these relationships, and they're left in a considerably worse place because of it within their social standings. So my perception of this is, having done some bad stuff, hurt people around you, but have never taken the blame, you finally fess up to everything, find yourself reborn as someone who takes responsibility for their actions and follows along with the consequences of this. Being forgiven sounds like a great thing, but it also comes with the tarnished reputation. At least that's how I perceive it. It doesn't really seem to take a negative or positive stance on it. Kind of more of a cold third-person view on how this happens. Completely outside the situation, simply describing it scientifically rather than taking an opinion on if this was the right way to handle things or not. It's an interesting song, I suppose. You don't see lyrics like this too often. But beyond that, I don't know. I've got to be missing something, right? I don't know. Pushing forward into a couple of shorter tracks here. Both of these are sub 3 minutes. Let's check out Southern Hemorrhage, which is interesting because it sounds like it's going to say Southern Heritage. We have a straightforward 4/4 here with an interesting rhythmic syncopation to it. That's a very aggressive 4/4. Really pushing the bounds of the time signature. I don't know what that transition was. Well, I said that we heard a couple too many songs that got away from the noisier element. They're back. I've been waiting for this song. I think it is our shortest. It's called SVVANS. I tried to do that with a straight face. All right. Southern Hemorrhage was a direct response to my calling them out for removing the noisier bits, the weird, interesting sonic textures. They absolutely filled that track with them, and it actually creates a really nice contrast and pacing through the album. Like I mentioned, they're kind of a 10 out of 10 as far as intensity is concerned all of the time. It's not a band that has a lot of nuance or contrast or dynamics to their writing. They write at this level all the time. And so we do have a couple of dips, like the end of track 3, like track 9 here, that kind of gives us some moments of less intense sections, less volume in sections, less layers in sections. But another way that they can create contrast is by omitting parts of their composition. And we got rid of higher pitched ideas. We completely changed up the sonic palette of tracks, what was that, 4 and 5 there? No, it was 6 and 7. By removing those higher pitched, more changed, altered guitar sounds going on there. And so when we come back to Southern Hemorrhage, it really hits. Something was lost and now something's been added back in. And you can feel it missing in those songs. I wonder if that was more intentional than than I think. I mean, I like to have the benefit of the doubt, where I'll just assume that everything is done for the most artistic reasons, and that this is very purposeful, and maybe there even is something in the lyrics of track 6 and 7 that's supposed to feel like something's missing, that is then put back in on track 8, musically represented here. But even without that angle, it could still just be really good album pacing of having the little bit of dynamics that they have access to on their music that they want to use. They can certainly make something lighter and calmer, but it's not the music they want to make. So they will use dynamics where they can, and removing elements of the composition and then bringing it back in does allow some sort of pacing and fluidity between tracks. And it is interesting. I was talking about how these songs are blurring together for me, but 6 and 7 not having those, while being, I think, more boring songs, does stand out on the album. That pocket of songs is going to be something I will remember and will probably continue to reference because it stands out to me. Much like the end of track 3, which I'm sure y'all are tired of hearing me bring up now. So that's interesting. But aside from that, track 8's Southern Hemorrhage ends up feeling very much like the first handful of tracks off of the album. Lots of heaviness, lots of weight, lots of uniformity, of rhythm and texture, and just everyone playing the same thing and bringing a bunch of weights and contrasting that with these really loud, high-pitched, noisy alarm sounds. It is, once again, a song that I would very easily confuse with pretty much anything else I've heard on the album, but it does bring something back that has been missing for a few minutes, which is a very cool way of creating a bit of pacing and fluidity through the album, even if it isn't necessarily something I'm enjoying. Now that takes us to SVVANS. I don't know what to think of this one. I kind of wanted to like it. We start out quiet, real quiet, actually, kind of build the sound out of it. But as soon as I heard the faster quasi breakbeat thing going on with the drums and the tension and dissonance in the drone that was happening, I mean, it ended up being a chordal movement, but it's just like long held out notes, which is something we oddly don't get a lot of on this album. But I started hearing the dissonance and I was like, oh, okay, this is their style of music. It's just a different representation of it. It's still not going to be chill. And sure enough, by the end of the track, it doesn't go in that direction at all. This is not something that ends up being a nice chill ambient midpoint. It is just as stressful and antagonistic as any other track. It just swaps out its rough staccato syncopation for gnarly, tense, anxious driving chords, with this ridiculously forward momentum drum stuff going on underneath it. It is a very cool way of swapping out their usual sound without actually ditching anything that the album's been going for. It achieves the same thing through a different route, and I appreciate that. I'm curious if they'll do it again. I'm going to assume not, since all of the songs moving forward are on the, well, for them, longer side. But they could surprise me. They could introduce it into parts of some of these songs, or even maybe the outro might return back to this. You never know with them. But I do think it's nice that they change things up without losing who they are, what they're trying to do with the album. Anything else? Oh, yeah. I picked up a little blueprint thingy here. A way of understanding how they craft music. If you ever wanted to make music like them, this might be a neat little trick to put in your own sounds. There have been multiple, maybe even 100% of the times we've done this specific idea pops up. There have been moments, usually towards the end of a song, where we will move to a halftime breakdown. This is pretty typical for post-hardcore, a lot of dashcore styles. Metalcore uses this, and it's a breakdown, right? Pretty typical stuff. It exists in a few different styles of music. But I'm pretty sure this might even be 100% of the times we've heard a breakdown. The beat before the breakdown starts, the instruments cut out. You get one beat of primarily silence and a vocal sound. Usually it is the last syllable of the statement that's being said before moving into the next sentence, but it gives the instruments a break to differentiate where we were and where we are going. Transitions aren't really something this band cares about. Most transitions are just make some noise, and then when we come back playing, it'll be something different. But here it's the opposite of that. It's silence to transition between ideas. It ends up working well, primarily because it removes time from the equation. You can still feel out the previous tempo, but no instruments are really laying that down. And so when we drop the tempo to get into the breakdown, it feels more jarring. And I think that's really what they're going for on a lot of this, because I'm not going to say smoothness is a quality they really care about too much. And so creating these jarring transitions and allowing space and time to amplify the jarringness to make it more divisive between the two ideas, I mean, that's a really smart decision. You might want to listen for that going forward. Next time you hear a breakdown, just be like, oh, wait, the vocalist, he was the only one there a beat ago. Yeah, it pops up a lot, maybe even every time. And it's super effective at achieving this goal. So cool stuff there. Lyrics. This seems to be a song, a condemnation of people who have given up their minds, their ability for critical thoughts, and instead follow on, I don't know, vibes, feelings. It doesn't really explain, but it does show that they are perpetuating some of the worst things that they're capable of. The beginning states, where the stages of the forgotten blood of the pledges run rampant, encasing fury as your head splits open with your thoughts now broken. Talking about forgetting the tasks that were done before your time to ensure that life would be better today. You've forgotten your history, basically, and you're making decisions now that run opposed to what you should be doing. It says, your head splits open and your thoughts are now broken. Later on, it says, are you glad that you've given in to giving up your minds? That is the question you'll answer with time. Forgive me, as it made me do worse than what I had seen. I am blind to the world called terror, blind to the word named terror, blind to the name called terror, blind to the ways of terror. I'm blind and dead. Basically, it seems to be about the condemnation of people who are doing things for all of the wrong reasons, doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons, and asking them to confront their actions. And as they do, they ask for forgiveness for what they have done. Maybe. I skipped over a couple stanzas that I don't really understand, but everything else kind of pieces together in that direction. So, I'm going to leave this here in the middle of this video. If you have any interpretation of these lyrics that aligns with mine, has any interpretation, there's a few songs I'm like, I don't know, dude, whatever. If you have any insight into it, though, let me know down in the comments. Whether it's one we've checked out already or one that I haven't checked out yet. I'm going to put this call at the end of the video, as I always do. But I'm interested to see what other people make of the words of this album. This song is heavily repetitive and speaks about the ways that life, the world, the things that are going on around us are absolutely terrible, and that there's no way we come out the other side unscathed. The beginning states that we are all swans in this waste. There's no way that life remains is a phrase that is used over and over and over in this song. There's no way that life remains when all the air chokes our grave, magnetizes and halts the blame, when our movements no longer gain, when we can't make any progress towards things. It says there's no way our life remains, barely sinking alone along the way. So begin the dive that others gave, belong to light that's on the wane. There's no way our life remains. I don't know, it seems to be positive. Begin the dive that others gave, belong to light that's on the wane. So be part of the positive vibes and paths that people before us have begun walking. Be part of that positivity, but there's no way that life remains. And maybe this is just a way of saying that life is going to change. Whether we fight back or don't whether we fight back or don't, that the future is going to be inherently different than it is today than it was yesterday. This way of life will not remain. It's up to us to choose whether tomorrow is brighter or darker. But I think it's really easy to read a negativity in this too. I mean, he says the air chokes our graves. It stops us from moving. No way that life remains after that. And that feels really heavy. It is only a recontextualization of that phrase towards the end of the track that tries to push towards a more positive meaning, but it is I don't know, it's like a silver lining there. More so than a feel-good way to wrap the song up. All right. Stereopticon is our next track, and we'll probably run that into Removal of the Copper Iris and the Lightning Pill, which is a wild title of a song. Let's dive in. I go again, getting tricked. I was like, okay, what are they going to do with this? Nothing. Slight pitch shifting, that's kind of neat. Not have 3 fake-out unders. I was alternating 8 and 9. I've pretty much given up on counting this album. Sometimes I get curious though. The toms, that's a nice change. This is a new vocal style, no? I don't think I've heard him go that low before. What's going on here? Is this a transition? This is pure ambient. There's been no ambience on this album, so this is wild. I was planning on stopping, but let's see where this takes us. Dude, that looks so cool. Like a little worm warbling. Do worms don't warble, but whatever. Oh. Why do I keep thinking there's going to be something different on this album? There is. More. No, we need to take a break. We need to take a break. That's too much fronteiere at one time. I was kind of hoping for a little bit of something new. The end of track 11 implied to me that we were going to explore something else. Track 12 begins with that same ambience, and they just didn't do anything with it. I guess they figured 20 seconds of ambience was more than enough. That was enough of your dip away from the assault. Let's get back to it. So yeah, I mean, what do I say about this stuff? It's more of the same, honestly. Tracks 10, 11, and 12 are more of the same. I do have a couple of things to say about this. Again, this comes from someone who doesn't listen to a lot of mathcore, who finds this all to be very repetitive and difficult to tell apart. I'm sure the more I listened to it, the more I'd be able to get a feel for certain parts of different songs and be able to tell them apart and differentiate them. But I feel like the album pacing has kind of grinded to a halt here. Now, part of that is certainly my experience with this. I am becoming quite fatigued. I am ready for the album to be over. I'm looking at 4 tracks to go, and you have no idea how much elation I have. The victory flag is it's in the view. I can see it. We just got to get to the finish line. I'm stoked for this. But I do feel like these last 3 tracks, I'm like, what's the point of this? Why are we just doing more of the same? Does the album need this? I feel like the concept has overstayed its welcome. I could have done with 20, 25 minutes of this with that lull in tracks 6 and 7, removing some of the more noisier bits to create a little bit of low, and the melodic part of the end of track 11 and track 3, not melodic, but atmospheric parts. And I think those 3 elements would have worked to create a little bit of contrast against their core sounds. And within a 20 or 25 minute album, I think that would have been a nice bit of pacing. Most of it high, still running at, full on intensity, but dipping it down every 2 tracks or so and changing things up a little bit. But for 50 minutes, we are 19 seconds shy of hitting that 50-minute mark. I don't see the necessity of all of it. I don't think that the length is supported by the art. Again, like I said, this just isn't my cup of tea, so it's certainly playing into this, but it made me think about why the songs are made the way they're made. And this brought me back to the lyrics. Besides the constant assault of sounds, the other main elements of this is that the vocals are always going. Now, granted, there's a lot of repetition in the lyrics. Some of these songs could easily be cut in half and still have said everything they need to, but sometimes the repetition in the lyrics is what solidifies the words. It's what gives them meaning. It turns them from just a statement into a mantra. So I can kind of get it from that perspective. Plus, these tracks are all ridiculously short to begin with. So I can't really see the purpose of cutting them in half and making, 1 minute songs out of these, 1.5 minute songs. So I don't know if that's necessarily on the table, but while I don't find a lot of engagement with the music, I do find that there are a lot of heavy hitting topics and themes in the lyrics. And I've kind of come around to this perspective. Now, granted, again, subjective. You may be here entirely for the music, but I find that the music acts as a platform for the words. I don't necessarily think that the words always thematically line up with the music. I don't think that everything we've read needs to be stated with this type of over-the-top sonic violence. But there is a general angst in the lyric elements that heavier music certainly works well with. And so I think from that angle, viewing this not as 16 minutes of interesting music, but 16 minutes of any kind of music to support and create a platform for this vocalist to say what they need to say makes a lot of sense to me. I think that there's a lot of musical elements in here that could be cut out and improved subjectively the pacing of the album. But I don't know that there's a lot of stuff we could take out lyrically. And unlike the music, which I feel is very similar from track to track, the lyrics aren't. Every song seems to be talking about something different while retaining callbacks and themes and similar vocabulary to ensure a type of cohesion with each of the lyrics of the songs. I think that's my best path towards appreciating this album, is understanding it more as a vehicle for poetry than anything else. Now again, that's just my perspective. You may be here for the music. You may not care what the dude's saying at all. It just sounds good to your ears, and this is a phenomenal 50 minutes for you. But it is not a phenomenal 50 minutes for me, and I'm trying to find some way to appreciate it beyond what I stated at the beginning, which was that they're kind of soundsmiths in a way, which continues to be, well, like I noted earlier, I think it was going to wane on me as the novelty left, but it is still an interesting part of their musical process, is the creation of all these cool sounds with their guitars. But it was not a strong enough novelty for me to stick around for 50 minutes. I think that kind of wore out its welcome fairly early too. The other thing I want to bring up, which is kind of interesting because I'm bringing it up now when tracks 11 to 12 work against this, but tracks 10 to 11 solidified the track transitions for me. This is an album that doesn't really stop. Musically, we don't have lulls, we don't have dipping points. Again, there is a rare place. The end of removal of the copper iris. Yeah, dude, we had like 20 seconds of ambience. That was wild. Southern Hemorrhage, I think it was. Oh no, it was Magnetic Drift started with something a bit more atmospheric. We had some harmonic stuff in track 3, but they're very much the exception to the norm, making up, I'd say, less than 5% of the music on the album. Most of this track is about being incredibly abrasive with every inch of room they have in their sound sphere and every second of time across the album. There are basically 0 moments, maybe effectively 0 moments would be a good way to word that, where you have a chance to relax and breathe. There isn't even gaps between tracks. As we heard track 10, Stereopticon, moving into removal of the copper iris, one ended and one began. They basically sounded like just a continuation of ideas. There was, as far as I can tell, no gap there. We had beat the last beat of the previous bar and the new beat of the new song. And they just, it felt like it flowed, even though I don't think they were designed to flow together. This just adds to the intensity and aggression of the album. You don't even get a break between songs. And yes, like I said, I understand the irony of saying that when tracks 11 to 12 had like a 20-second atmospheric thing going on there. But that is quite an exception to the norm. Most of these tracks just move right into another, and it's something that I've even mentioned across this reaction. Trying to find the right time to pause between tracks when honestly there is no second of silence to pause on. Most of the times when I say, let's dive into the next track, we're just a few milliseconds into it already. You can't pause these songs at the right time. And even when the, what song was it? Oh, Daydark. Yeah. So we went 2 seconds into that one. I've rewound that to second 0. I guarantee it's still going to sound like we came in just a hair after the song started, because I feel like most of these tracks actually start on the last half of a second from the previous track. It is not just a sonic assault on a per track basis, but they are ensuring that there are no moments for rest on the album. That is, I mean, that's an ideal right there. That is a vision of art. That is not something you accidentally do, especially when the music is like this. That is an intentional choice to make. I don't like it, but I've got to call it out for good design. It works so well within the entirety of the album and what it's trying to do sonically. You just got to give some appreciation for that vision and the execution of it. Let's say some lyrics. This track that I do understand lyrically seem to point at a type of revenge narrative for putting the narrator in this place where they are. They say we will remain until we return the heartache. We will remain until we callous our heart strings. So basically, we're going to inflict the damage onto them that they did to us, and we are going to harden ourselves so that they can't do it to us in the future. Interesting perspective for this. It says, stay where the fever has bloomed and the message is clearly stated. Blank is the way that we start till the moment is clearly painted. I like the idea of a canvas starting empty, being blank. That's where we start. And we work until the painting's finished. We cannot stop this halfway through. It states, now the progress is gone, though. Growing fumes and darker clouds, gloomy times are before us now, these parallel grounds. Nothing is what it seems. It seems to indicate that dark times are ahead. Maybe a lot of dark times. Maybe we did stop halfway in the project. We never completed the picture. We never saw this through to the end. The end simply states, cut me down, but never watch me bleed, oxidize my wounds, and hear me breathe. It's kind of lost on me. It says, water my wires, try me, water my wires, change me. I am no more. I don't know, man. This whole ending flipped the script. I thought I knew where I was going with this, and they changed to a completely different thing. I don't know on that one. At least I got some of it, though. That feels like an improvement compared to the last couple of tracks we've checked out. I'm a bit lost on this one too, but at least I can see how it's connected to the previous one. And this actually creates a bit of a trilogy here. I'm glad I got to check out all of these. Stereopticon wraps up with the lines, oxidize my wounds, water my wires, I am no more. We have this idea of electronics being worked into this. Here, it seems we follow in on that direction. And the next track is called Motherboard, so I'm assuming we're going to continue on with this idea of moving towards electronic selves. It says, electricity is now flowing, cauterizing all the veins like roads. Confine me. Nothing can move or I disengage, making the silence remain. It says, this version of me can do no wrong. So begin surgery, reach in, digging sin from ruin. We repeat a couple of these stanzas again, and the track ends with error from the start. I'm aware, I know where, get it. I don't know, dude, but the error idea is interesting. It's language that hasn't really been used too much on this album. It seems like it was saved for this moment when we begin to introduce the idea of electronics and digitization of selves, possibly a transference from humanity to some sort of electrical form. I don't know. It's also interesting we haven't seen the concepts of darkness, shadow. Well, we did have the smogginess of the sky in the last one, dark futures ahead, but we don't have darkness of shadow too much. The idea of fires being reborn in fire. Oh, this is another rebirth, though. I'm glad I went in that direction. To be born again as something new. This time not through fire, but through electricity. through oxidization of metal. So that's interesting. But I don't know what it means. It feels like it should all be connected, but I only have bits of threads here and there, and I'm not getting the bigger picture on this. We continue on with the themes of digitized selves, although it might be more metaphorical across these 3 tracks than literal, although there is a very literal surface read across these 3 songs too. This one is about being controlled by someone else. Now here's something interesting. I think this is the first time we have a proper gendered pronoun in here. This entire song has been against an amorphous you. A you that's destroying the world, a you that is emotionally and mentally damaging and exhausting. The I, the narrator. Here though, it says again she grabs a hold and infests the way we move in synchronized time frames. She grabs a hold until the opportunity is made to control us drones. We no longer have a you and an I, but a she and an us. And this is repeated throughout the entire song. A little bit later, she flashes to ask the questions we answer timely. The air we breathe is cultured to very fixed pathways. So we have this idea of a feminine figure controlling a group of others. I'm curious why this late in the album to shift perspective like this. I don't see much of a reason, but I don't really have a lot to go on given how loose my grasp is on the rest of the album's lyrics. I honestly thought most of these songs were completely disconnected aside from some thematic threads that move between them, but I'm curious if maybe this hasn't all been culminating to this point. Again, I make the request that if anyone has a stronger grasp on these lyrics, please let me know. Put them down in the comments, email me, I don't care. I'm really curious as to how all of this works together. It seems kind of odd that out of nowhere we have, at the very least, a trilogy of songs here that have shifted the perspective of the vocabulary. Anyways, we have the chorus. Maybe it is the most repeated stanza here. Go right? That didn't go right. Burn the bridge now and end flight. Nowhere in sight. The motherboard isn't in right. So the motherboard is the main, usually the largest board inside of an electronic. It's what most of the things are attached to. In a computer, the motherboard is where you put your memory and your storage and your CPU and your GPU and any other PCI chips that you have. Anything that you really need gets connected into the motherboard. It's the central electronic that houses and connects and communicates to everything else in the device. So if the motherboard isn't in right, then the central component of whatever we're talking about here is installed improperly. Now, I don't know how that works within everything else. I think the metaphor gets a little loose here and deviates a bit from the literal use of a motherboard. But I think that sitting with this general idea of a centralized element being incorrect is what this is going for. Towards the end of the song, we have a final stanza before we hit a mantra that is definitely a mantra. It says, motherboard isn't alive anymore. Remove her before infection soars. So again, I think motherboard is used a little bit more figuratively metaphorical in this case. Maybe as because of the use of the she throughout, a literal female parental figure or a guiding figure, a stand-in for a mother. It says, remove her before infection soars. Poised and torn now, I'm afraid nothing will remove her from my internal. Motherboard pulling my mind from the norm. Remove her and keep sanity once more. Then we have the mantra. Done with all her ways, stand still, forget, remove it. This is repeated 3 times before, and I chuckled at this because it felt like I didn't get the lyrical context around it. I just heard the dude say once more, as the song had already had a point that I thought was a good ending, and they were repeating this section. And then they repeated this section. He says once more, and they repeat the section. And I think I made some sort of lame joke like, no more. But it is, I think, supposed to establish this as a mantra that this person is done with being controlled. They will stand still against commands. They will forget about all of this programming and remove that side of themselves. Oh, and coming from the idea of programming, what if this is a song about removing instilled principles that you don't agree with anymore, that were thrust on you by parental figures in your youth? Maybe. It is vague enough that you could take it in a few different ways, but that's the one that kind of jumps out to me. Okay. Next track is called Daydark, which, okay, that's a word. We are on a steep decline. Yeah, decline of time. This one's 4 minutes, the next one's 3, the next one's 3, the next one's 2. They get shorter as we go. 12 minutes of music ahead of us, 4 tracks. The finish line's in sight. Let's do it. And you see what I mean about feeling like you still started a little bit into the song? I really think the beginning of that guitar tone at the beginning was on the previous track. Is there a second vocal set here? Got some Bring to the Horizon here with that heavy reverb, very light, airy vocal work against atmosphere. Bringing back some of that chiptune 8-bit drum sound. Interesting guitar tones, they're very rounded out. Wow. Wow. the rhythmic pacing of this, the phrasing in general. So many short stops and extensions. They actually have some really cool panning thing going on there. Dude, I swear I'm starting to hit like some dissociative trances. What? This is a nice change of pace though, which means it's gonna go away soon. Probably right about now. Shift on this was pretty nice. As usual, there's just no place to pause. We are coming up on our penultimate analysis segment. I'm fairly certain 15 and 16 are going to get run together. I want to end with some praise. Alright, y'all already know what I don't like about the album. I think I've expressed that in plenty of words, and I have plenty of examples to show why this album is not for me. I have tried to balance that as best I can, either with words of praise or trying to find positive perspectives on the stuff that doesn't work for me. But here I just want to go out with some things that I think do work well. Both of these tracks had some pretty cool ambient sections to them. Nice little lulls to give me a moment to catch my breath. That more melodic, atmospheric stuff with the delayed, reverbed guitars. in Glacial Plasma, track 14. Very cool stuff. Absolutely love that. Wish we would have had more of it. But you know, that's not the kind of music they make, but I thought it was a really nice idea, and I enjoyed the time I had with that all 4 times through that guitar riff, which is how I called it. Groups of 4 is definitely what they tend to work with on this album. Daydark had some of that Bring Me the Horizon, heavy vocal reverb, and light, airy, breathy kind of vocals, very effortless sounding. I enjoyed both of those moments. I'm glad we got them back to back. I wish we could have a little bit more of them throughout the whole album, but coming up on the end, give me a treat for sticking around, I guess. Even if that treat is such a small morsel of positivity in this music. But I enjoy that. I like how even this late into the album, they're still playing around with things, still adding things, removing things, kind of changing things up a little bit. We had that pitch shifting stuff at the end. Granted, super noisy, dissonant, abrasive stuff throughout almost all of Glacial Plasma, but just hearing how they worked with pitch in order to add intensity to that section, very cool idea. Another thing I want to bring up is the vocalist. This is something I haven't really talked about much because a lot of the vocals are just one note. He comes in on that note, he hits it over and over and over and over. It's doing what the guitars do. They're doing the same thing. They come in on a note, they hit it over and over in a rhythmic fashion. So the vocals being monotone actually lines up with what the rest of the band is doing. And while I'm not a big fan of the lack of diversity in the sound, because of that, I think it really works in a sound like this. I find it to be a bit more awkward in like tech death, where everybody's doing wild things, and then, you know, your vocals are just like this boring monotone thing going on. It feels like they're kind of a weak point of that kind of composition, but here it lines up with what everyone's doing. It locks in, it works. But the vocalist also has a couple other different styles. In fact, Glacial Plasma kicks off with some of the highest pitched fries that I think he's done this entire album. And they provide a little bit of contrast. We also heard some really low, I think still fries. I don't think we got into that guttural sounds on one of the previous tracks. I don't remember what it was, but I remember calling it out in the reaction. I was like, is that one of the lowest tones we've heard this guy scream on? So he actually has a couple of different techniques in his harshes that he swaps out from time to time to benefit the section that they're in the most. And I think that's pretty cool. I got to give credit where credit's due. A lot of vocalists, especially in the core adjacent stuff, metalcore, post-hardcore, mathcore, they tend to just lock into one sound. So it's really nice to hear someone who has a little bit more diversity to their harshes. And I think that, once again, it just fits with the general composition of the music anyways. The big thing that I'm surprised I haven't touched on at all is honestly the production of all of this. Everything is perfectly placed. I can hear the bass, I can hear the guitars, I can hear the drums, I can hear the vocals. The vocals are given a little bit of boost when they need it. They're kind of reduced down when some of the instrumentation is removed and they don't need to fill up as much space in order to be as present in the mix. When we have those weird sounds on the outskirts, I can hear those. When we had additional vocals way back there on clean vocals on track 3, actually, they were kind of pushed into the back. They were there to support the song, but they were still audible, clearly audible. When we have some of the lulls and we have a little bit more nuanced composition, you can hear all the little changes. It was the reverbed guitar part in Glacial Plasma that stood out to me as like a really strongly produced section. And the more that I listened to this song and thought back on the album as a whole, there really isn't any instrument that's difficult to hear. There's no point in the album that I felt was too muddy. That as big as these sounds are, as massive as this album is, as gritty and dirty and filthy as this album can be, it's still incredibly clear. not necessarily a clean production, but one with clarity in mind. You can make everything out on this. That's a tall order for the engineer, which I'm just now remembering is the lead guitarist. So major props for that. Fantastic job making this sound as excellent as it does. I think that's about it, because these two songs, aside from their two interludes, I mean, it's a lot of the same. Yeah. Lyrics. I think this song is about getting through dark times, which actually lines up with the past two tracks kind of going towards more of a darker perspective and envisioning a dark future ahead of us. This one helps create a sort of feeling of getting through it. It says, as large as some seem as gods, they're bleeding off. So it may seem that some people are godlike, just too big to fall, but we're having less and less of those people. Us at the bottom, we're winning through attrition. It just takes time. It says, in hopes that we will float here with gravity, knowing that we're nowhere. Now this I don't quite know, but it does feel relaxing to just float somewhere, anywhere. In fact, a lot of this album has been very intense, and just laying down and clearing the mind sounds phenomenal. So I don't necessarily know what's going on there pertaining to the whole gods line, but it's something. After that, he says, this day is dark. Unholy as the night is, though, I will be waiting brightly, so brightly, rested, ruined, rusted. My thoughts exactly stated remain hidden until a light is sanctioned. Now grab your thoughts and run. I'm going to move on. I'm going to shine on. This day is dark. I love that. The day is dark right now. But every night is followed by day. He says, I'll wait. I'll wait for that to come around. And I like this. I'll be rested, ruined, rusted. It's a battle to constantly fight these forces. I'll be rested for now, but that doesn't mean that I'm 100% whole. The damages of the battle previously are still evident here. But he says, I'll have stood for what I needed to stand for. My thoughts are exactly stated. And now that you see the sun starting to come up, it's time to move on. It's time to shine on. But for now, we're in darkness. Rest. Tomorrow's another day. Which, actually saying it that way kind of feels, it's positive, right? It's like, yeah, dude, you know, we didn't win today, but we can tomorrow. We can always bring the light. But also, given just how long this album seems to be going on, and this concept is continuous throughout all of it, I'm starting to feel worn down and beaten, as if I'm with the narrator here. I'm getting tired here at the end of the album too. I would say that mentally I am ruined and rusted, and I haven't really had time to rest through this, so I wouldn't say that. So the idea of there being another day ahead of us, like rest now, you'll need your strength tomorrow. It's like, yeah, dude, we got it tomorrow. Then you realize like there's always a tomorrow, and kind of how I'm feeling, where there's always another song to beat me into submission here. But I do feel like this is supposed to be some sort of positive message as we head into the end of the album. All right, Glacial Plasma. I honestly think that this is the highest ratio of words to song length. There's a lot going on here for only 3.5 minutes music. I don't get most of it, but I do see a lot of recurring themes, and I wonder if we aren't starting to tie everything together. It says, scars will always still bear pain of the initial injury. born inside the towering walls that hover down on me. So we have refinement, containment, not refinement, containment. We have visibility of injuries past. We have the scars here. It says, carry me, torture me, end me, scouring top to below to invent myself shows more. We have this idea of being born again, although this time, I suppose for the first time, the primary invention rather than the reinvention of the self. But I don't know what that means. It says that there's a red sea in front of me. You have now awakened in this glacial haven. You are now mistaken, a bleeding glacial station. Black water marks, grips, and chokes like arms. Fever raises like waves and crashes. In chases as we stand in place, no longer harmed. Did they win? Is this finally a positive end? I don't think so. Black water grips, chokes like arms. We have the fever again, which has shown up a couple of times in the lyrics, but he says that we stand no longer harmed. This sentence shows up a lot. Gut-wrenching, overspilling until encountering isn't measured fully. That sounds like word salad to me. I don't know what that means. Can someone explain that one to me? The lyricist stands behind it. They state this so many times on this track, and I don't understand it at all. We have a lot of repetition until we have your days are no longer left. And now we live, paving wakes blindly. And now we drift, bleeding again someday, bringing blood. And this takes us to a concept of floating, which you may remember from Daydark. Floating for a life, sinking down, burning for light, bringing blood. And this is repeated 10, 12 times until we wrap the song up. I don't know what any of this means either. Honestly, I don't get this guy's lyrics. There's a couple of songs in here I think I've done okay with, but I would really love to have this dude sit down and say, this is what I meant by this line, and this is why I brought it back later, and this is how it ties into that one. Because in my mind, a lot of these sentences, they don't mean anything. Like that gut-wrenching overspilling until encountering isn't measured fully. There's been dozens of lines like that I haven't brought up. You know, I've talked about this. I've skipped stanzas that I didn't have anything to add to. But a lot of it comes off like that. I don't make any meaning out of it. And it has meaning. Almost every stanza on this album is repeated somewhere. There's a lot of repetition in the lyrics. It means something to the lyricist, but not to me. And a lot of it's because I don't understand how the words interact with each other to form this sentence. Honestly, it sometimes feels like I'm reading a different language, a slightly different dialect of English, where like the words are there. I know what they mean to me. They just don't work together in this sentence for me. Here we are. The final, 6.5 minutes of music. Let's do it. We've made it to the, if you're with me on this, thank you. I didn't have to do this journey alone. Let's dive in. The Damage and the Sift, and then Hope. I don't like that. Oh, come on. Why just gotta be an 8 repetition? Oh no, it's the backhand texture. such subtle pitch shifting on the guitars. I've talked about being half steps in the past, but I wonder if it's microtonal actually. Seconds to go. They got introduced a new short idea. This is not the first time they've done that either. The second fade out of the album. Yeah, that unexpected. Straight up Dillinger right there. Some of their guitar sounds are freaking hilarious, man. Why did that sound identical to the ending of Opaque Horizon? There's a 5-second difference. Are you kidding me? Why are they so adverse to writing an ending? We had 2 fade outs. We had 0 other tracks that had any sort of finality to them. It was usually, as I pointed out there's 10 to 15 seconds to go and they write a brand new section that runs directly into the next track, which is part of the overbearing element of the album, that there's just no breaks, not even between the songs themselves. I really figured for Hope, the last track of the album, they would have written some sort of conclusion to it. And we were kind of moving in that direction with 11 seconds to go. The song was beginning to fade out. I really assumed, you have 10 seconds left. What are you going to do with that? Most bands will take 40 seconds to fade out, or a minute even, to fade out their final song. 10 seconds, that should be plenty. No. They stop the fade out and bring back a new section for 10 seconds and then it just abruptly ends. I don't even know what to think about that. It's just such, like I mentioned earlier, the decisions that this group makes with their composition, with their production, with their pacing and structure, none of it would come naturally to me. I cannot even wrap my mind around the decisions that led to this album. And that's, I mean, it's certainly fascinating. I mean, it's one of the cool things about music and art in general and humanity as a whole is that we're all different. We're all unique. We all have different ways of conceptualizing things and expressing ourselves. And they can make an album like this and it just feels entirely like a part of them, just their essence flowing out into sonic form. If I tried to write anything like this, it would feel very outsidery. It would feel very forced, I think, and you would be able to tell, hey, you know, this guy really worked to create this sound, and parts of it feel a bit unnatural. But for Fronteiere, this is just who they are. It's an extension of them. And something like that ending, I don't get it. I can't even really say I like it. It doesn't feel very ending-y to me. It's it kind of, much like most of the album, it's kind of awkward as far as the pacing of everything goes. And I don't think the ending is paced well either, but it's what makes them them. It lines up beautifully with everything they've presented on this album. And for me to have expected anything else is just a fool's errand. Why would I even do that? Of all the time I expected something else from them, you think I'd have learned. I didn't. They were still tricking me at the end of the album. All because I refused to learn from my mistakes and continue to undercut who they are as artists, I suppose. Part of it, though, is probably just me hoping for something I could enjoy here. Speaking of things I could enjoy, I did like that penultimate section for Hope. Interestingly, though, it reminded me of Opaque Horizon, the final semi-melodic harmonic element of that. Dude, this album scrambled my brains. I'm gonna mix words up, I swear. But it reminded me of the ending to track 3. Bringing in a bit of texture and harmony and atmosphere, lots of reverb, and those quiet, clean vocals. And I'm pretty sure that the chord progression is the same one from track 3. If not, then I'm getting it confused with the only other time we had any sort of harmonic device in here, and I can't remember what track that was on. But I'm pretty sure that ending is a reprise from elsewhere in the album, which is kind of cool, but I assumed that being that track 4's Death had a slash at the end of it, and this has a slash before Hope, that track 4 and 16 were going to be connected. But as far as I can tell, I didn't hear anything that would indicate that. However, like I've said, a lot of this album blurred together, and honestly, this song sounded a lot like Death, aside from the ending, because all of the songs sounded very similar to me. So that's another case where I think someone who's more familiar, who has spent more time with this album and can understand some of the smaller nuances on it. Could tell me if there is anything that goes on between Death and Hope that would connect them. Aside from lyrical themes, which Death already had, Hope pretty prevalent in its lyrics, and I'm expecting this track, Hope, to have Death components in its lyrics to complete that circle. Otherwise, these two songs did not do anything to change my mind on them. They line up with a lot of what I expect from fronteiere, and you know, I guess just a quick recap here. Great production, great performance. Everybody is just phenomenal at what they do, and it comes together into this wild work of art that exactly knows what it sets out, or exactly knows what it wants to be, and sets out to accomplish that in every facet of itself, and it does that completely. It is not my cup of tea. I will never ever come back to this album, and I don't want to check out any other fronteiere either. Maybe someone be like, oh, you know, this song's different. Yeah, I might do that, but I've heard a couple of tracks and I've heard a whole album, and it's not, it's like Car Bomb, man. I have a lot of appreciation and admiration for the skill that goes into this. I don't enjoy it though. And I mean, I guess that's the biggest admiration I can have, is kind of extending that olive branch, meeting them in the middle and saying, you guys are excellent at what you're doing. May I never hear it again. Let me check out some lyrics on these last two, and then we're going to wrap this one up. It seems in the damage in the Sift that our narrator has finally caught the U. Now, I'm still not entirely sure that all of this is connected, but I'm willing to entertain it now, given the connectivity of tracks 10, 11, and 12, and the recurrence of themes here about a destructive you, although I do still think that the you is more of a pointing towards a group of people rather than a specific person, but whatever. Basically, this looks at the aftermath of a war. It says there's terror as the wreckage is scattered in the midst of an uproar that's in remission in an altered division, grown inside of the fracture as eyes are on backwards, and the evidence lays under the details that you miss, the damage and the sift. You remove and omit the damage and the sift. He's saying that as the dust clears on all of this, and we're finally looking at the aftermath of all of what's happening, people's eyes are on backwards. They're not seeing things for what they are. It says that the evidence lays underneath what is omitted and obscured, obfuscated, and hidden. It's everything that we miss and everything that's removed and omitted. That is where the truth and evidence lies. But even in this, you're still hiding it. Talks about the bodies and their scars looking way more ruined as the dust passes and the sun rises. We can actually see the damage for what it is now that the sun's coming up. A lot of repetition for a while. Then it says his jaws are shut, corrupt with rust, so he learned that speech isn't demanded. His jaws locked up with grit and blood, so he learned that speech isn't free. The detail of culprit you remove and omit, I call it, don't forget, I've fallen in regret. Unless this part is mostly talking about how this is one way to cover up the truth, is to silence people. Jaws that are shut and locked up, covered in blood, people forgetting things and regretting that they've forgotten things. I don't know what else this is supposed to point towards, though. Rise to catch yourself. Writhe from pressure felt as they choke you out. Rise to flag them down. Writhe to move about so they can't claim. This just seems to be about somebody on, in a death spiral, a death rattle right here, doing their best to escape the death from those below them that are calling for it. Doing whatever he can. He feels the pressure felt as they're trying to choke him, and he writhes, trying to move about so that they can't claim his life. So it is a specific you, but I still feel like that's a bit more on the metaphorical side. But we still have what seems to be the end of this war and all of the damages left and all of the lack of truth and evidence that is still going to be present moving forward. We may have won this battle, but the information war is still upon us. And here we end it with, I think, a shifting perspective of narration, as our previous narrator has been killed or is on their deathbed. The song ends with the stanza torn, but with the holes that entered now showing, you left a mark now glowing. In a place where darkness thrives, you'll be recognized as someone with hope. That our narrator has brought hope to power, introduced it to people, and has led the way for this victorious day that existed in the damage and the sift. The rest of this, I think, is about looking at the aftermath once again. Gray skies, black, white. Hope is just red inside. I'm not sure what all these colors are supposed to represent. Gray skies make sense, but it says clouds, rain, paint of mute rays, of black and gray skies on white sunlight, in dreams of aster waves, as delicate as they seem. Now back to reality as we partake in meaning. Sound is just like a God modified wrong. What we hear spawns thoughts we take wrong. Once again, this is just a series of very short cut down sentences that I don't really get. This, I think, is my big, I don't want to call it an issue, but where I find most difficulty understanding the lyrics is that a lot of the time I wish the sentence were just a few words longer to really clarify what it's saying. And maybe this is just because I'm an amateur lyrical analyzer, whatever the term is. Like I said, this album scrambled my brains. I'm going to decompress so hard after I turn this video off, after I'm done recording here. But it's like, sound is just like a God. Okay, I can kind of go with that. Modified wrong. What we hear spawns. Spawns what? And it says thoughts we take wrong. Okay, so what we hear spawns thoughts that we interpret poorly. Is that what a modified wrong is? Oh, actually, I think I'm starting to get this. Just barely, but sound is like a God, interpreted differently by different people. And see, that's the part I needed to know. That's the part I wish I was intentionally stated so that I could make these connections rather than having to read between the lines to get there. Although that does make it a little funner, like a puzzle. I just wish poetry puzzles were as natural to me as musical puzzles, but whatever. Sound is like a God. People interpret things differently based on how they hear it, what biases they have, what parts stand out to them the most. And because of that, much like religion and gods, violence happens because of it. We hear things the wrong way, and well, now we have an opposing side, someone to fight. All of this because we chose to partake in meaning. Dang, I wish some of the other songs would have had me hitting that point of clarity. Although I don't think that helps me understand the rest of the track, but it is nice for me to say, this part made no sense to me, and then I slowly get there. It is a very slow process, though. It says, gloom hears our envy. Mass cheers are sending ghostly fabrications. So, the victory, everyone's, cheering that they've won. I fall this distance of an early grave. This is before the perspective shift. Says, the blackest eyes as they glow from inside the storm tell me to beware this alternate route. And then the thing about torn but with holes, you left a mark, you'll be recognized as hope. And so this is more about the aftermath. The other was a moment of, the final part of the battle there. Actually killing this leader, the evil guy who brought all of this pain and darkness onto everyone. But this is the true aftermath to it. The resistance lost their leader too, but it instilled hope in everyone else. So they ended up dying a martyr. Was this whole album a concept album? Did I miss that? I mean, I'm thinking back to other tracks, Heirloom in particular. Maybe it was about destiny of leading people, but I still don't know. The ideas of, hanging effigies, burning from trees and stuff like that. Like, I don't know how to work all that into this. Corrosive wash. I mean, maybe the idea of reborn into a leader. But I think it's fairly clear with Stereopticon, removal of Copper Iris, Motherboard, that is certainly a self-contained trilogy, but also Daydark, Glacial Plasma, Damage in the Sift, and Hope all kind of work together and bounce off of themes that we have been exploring, even if this isn't a linear narrative. Thematically, there is a lot of connectivity here. All right. We're going to wrap this up. It's kind of bittersweet, honestly. I don't want to hear any more of this stuff. It is definitely fatiguing for me, and it's wiped me out completely. Like I said, I'm going to decompress so hard. I'm just going to fall into something comfy and space out for a while and enjoy some silence. But I'm kind of coming around to some of the lyrical side, and I kind of want to dive into that some more. My brain's mush at this point though, so maybe that's for another day. These are my thoughts on Frontierer's Oxidized. Let me know what you thought of this. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on, if you have a different perspective on any of this, a different opinion, let me know. Put all that stuff down into the comments section. Above that, in the description box, there's a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, ways to select songs that show up on the channel in the future, a link to the Discord server. I think I said that already. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. Go check it out. It's cool things over there. I mean, look how many buttons are there. Buttons are cool. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of them. Buttons are cool. Why would I even say that? Golly. This wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC as usual for a Sunday anyways. That's not a usual time. We'll do a live stream. Just hang out, listen to some music for a couple of hours. It's real chill. Conversation is great. If you can make it, I suggest you do. Or check it out anyways. Might not be your jam. I don't know. It's worth trying though. We always have a blast. I look forward to them every week. Otherwise, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Monday through Saturday, 5 p.m. EST. That's when you're going to find the usual reaction stuff. We'll kick it off with next week's theme, which is something. I honestly can't remember, and that's... Well, normally I'd be a little concerned, but right now, I can't expect myself to add. Simple numbers. I'm so wiped out. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.